Hello, colleagues. My name is Marcos Pesquera, and I am the Assistant Vice President for Diversity, Health Equity, Inclusion, as well as Community Benefit for Christos Health. And I also proudly serve as the President-elect of the National Association of Latino Healthcare Executives, NALHE. I am honored today to introduce our session of NALHE Talks Policy. Today, we will convene top healthcare leaders and our legal colleagues at Husch-Blackwell to discuss the U.S. Supreme Court ruling of United States versus Vaella Madero, the case that involved Congress's exclusion of residents of Puerto Rico from the Supplemental Security Income program. That is a safety net program that provides cash assistance to older, disabled, and blind Americans who have very, very low incomes. As healthcare executives and leaders and members of a professional society, it is important to keep ourselves informed of local, state, and federal legislation, as well as policy that affect the health and well-being of the patients and the communities that we serve. The policy that this panel of experts will be discussing today affects over 3.2 million Hispanic Americans, citizens that reside in Puerto Rico. NALHE, in collaboration with Husch-Blackwell, one of our premier corporate partners, launched the NALHE Talks Policy Series to provide an amplified platform to share insights, experiences, and discuss opportunities regarding health policy, healthcare legislation, and regulation. It is my honor today to introduce our moderator, Dominic Castillo. He's an associate attorney at Husch-Blackwell and president of the NALHE Central Texas chapter. Learn more about NALHE at www.nalhe.org, and I invite you to join us in this conversation. With that, I turn it over to Dominic.
Thank you, Marcos. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest chapter in NALHE's Talk Policy series. Today, I'm joined by some very esteemed guests who will share with us some of their experiences of our brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico. Today's guests will share the effects of a recent Supreme Court decision that affects the benefits of Puerto Rico and the people related to these federal benefits. We're also going to hear a little bit about how the loss of these benefits are impacting the healthcare system throughout the island. First, I would like to introduce Jorge Pesquera. Would you like to say hello?
Hi, good morning. I am Jorge Pesquera. I work for a managed behavioral healthcare organization, APS Health in Puerto Rico. We manage 1.3 million lives. And I am also president-elect of the Puerto Rico Healthcare Administrators College.
Thank you, Jorge, and welcome. Isabel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. My name is Isabel Avislaiman. I am an attorney in San Juan, Puerto Rico, also admitted in New York. Currently, I am representing plaintiffs, hopefully a plaintiff class, in a lawsuit against the Social Security Administration and other government individuals and defendants. And hopefully we will have more progress soon, but as of yesterday, the stay has been lifted after the case of Vaella Madero was decided. So we have some hope that we will get on with the ordinary judicial processes.
Awesome. Thank you. So thanks for being here today. We also have a very esteemed guest in the executive president of the Association of Hospitals in Puerto Rico, Mr. Jaime Pla. Would you like to introduce yourself, sir?
Hello, my name is Jaime Pla. I am the executive president of the Puerto Rico Hospital Association. It's this year we're completing 80 years of existence as an association, and 95% of all the hospitals in Puerto Rico, which are 68 hospitals, are members of our association. And let me tell you that we work very hard in these issues, federal issues, of trying to get better financing for the hospitals in Puerto Rico and better health for the beneficiaries of the Medicare and the Medicaid programs, together with the rest of the population of Puerto Rico. So it's my pleasure to be here with you today, and I am sure that we're going to have a great conversation.
Thank you so much, Jaime. We're very, very happy to have you here today. And we also have an esteemed attorney from Hush Blackwell, Danielle Gilbert. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Dominic. My name is Danielle Gilbert. I'm an attorney at Hush Blackwell's Austin office with Dominic. I focus on healthcare litigation. I'm glad to be here today. Thanks for hosting NALHE and Dominic.
Thank you. Again, we're very glad to have everybody here today. So as Marcos mentioned, we're going to be discussing this case. It's a Social Security benefits case, but it reflects the kind of treatment that Puerto Rico has received and kind of is a reflection of the state of affairs in Puerto Rico's healthcare system. For the mainland audience, I just wanted to share briefly about who might be unaware of the official status of Puerto Rico, also called the Estado Libre Asociado de Puerto Rico, or the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Since Puerto Rico's independence from Spain in 1897, is the largest unincorporated U.S. territory. The role of the United States since the beginning has been some type of noble purpose. At least the general at the time said that the United States was going to be a benevolent patriarch. History tends to show that although the Puerto Rico are American citizens, they are often treated as less and usually forgotten about. So today we kind of hope to bridge the gap on some of that, bring some attention, some awareness to these issues, and kind of hope the people on the mainland get a better idea of what's going on over there. So we'll let Danielle go ahead and share a little bit about the case that kind of was the inspiration for this panel. Danielle, you want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. So I'll just give sort of a broad overview of the case history, the facts, and what happened at the Supreme Court. So on April 21st of this year, 2022, the United States Supreme Court decided United States v. Vaella Madero, and held that U.S. citizens residing in Puerto Rico are ineligible to receive Supplemental Security Income, which we call SSI, from the SSI program. SSI is a federal program that was established in 1972. It's funded by general tax revenues, and that's important. We'll talk about that in a minute, rather than Social Security taxes. So, and it does provide monthly payments to individuals for their basic needs, and it is viewed as a social safety net for vulnerable people. So to be eligible for SSI monthly payments, an individual generally has to be a US citizen or national with limited resources, very scarce resources, with a disability or blindness, or those over 65. And then as clarified by this recent United States Supreme Court opinion, the applicant must reside within one of the 50 states, the District of Columbia, or the Northern Mariana Islands, which is a U.S. territory, with some exceptions for service members and students who are studying abroad. So this case originated after Jose Luis Vaello Madero suffered a serious illness in 2012 while he was living in New York. He applied for and was approved for SSI benefits, and he did begin to receive those benefits. About a year later, in 2013, he moved to Puerto Rico to be near his family. And continue to receive those SSI benefits. In 2016, when Mr. Vaella Madero applied for Social Security retirement benefits, the Social Security Administration noticed that his address was in Puerto Rico and ceased payments under the SSI plan. The U.S. Department of Justice then sued Mr. Vaella Madero on behalf of the Social Security Administration under a criminal statute to recover the approximately about $28,000 he had received in SSI benefits while residing in Puerto Rico since 2013. Fortunately, attorneys agreed to represent Mr. Vaella Madero pro bono and argued that the denial of SSI to citizens who live in a U.S. territory is unconstitutional because it discriminates against U.S. citizens living in U.S. territories. And Mr. Vaella Madero's attorneys argue that this is a violation of the equal protection component of the Fifth Amendment due process clause of the U.S. Constitution. And the trial court and the First Circuit Court of Appeals in the United States agreed. They held that the Social Security Administration's denial of the benefits to Mr. Vaella Madero was in fact a violation of his rights because the denial did not have and this is the standard for this test, a rational basis. So that's a test for constitutionality in this context. the government would have had to show there was a rational basis for the denial. So the courts found that the denial was discriminatory against US citizens of Puerto Rico and therefore unconstitutional. So the United States appealed to the Supreme Court, arguing that Congress was allowed to deny Puerto Rico residents SSI. And what we'll be discussing today is that the Supreme Court agreed with the United States and reversed with only Judge Sotomayor dissenting. So the majority opinion, which was authored by Justice Kavanaugh, in part reasoned that Congress has historically not required Puerto Ricans to pay most federal income and other taxes. And so he reasoned that Congress has a rational basis for denying US citizens in Puerto Rico Social Security, SSI. The court had some other reasons as well, but this was the primary reason, was because of those federal income and other taxes. Now, Judge Sotomayor, as I mentioned, dissented from the majority, and she emphasized that SSI is a federalized program that is intended to provide income to the most vulnerable citizens who lack the means to support themselves. She also pointed out that, and as Dominic mentioned, that Puerto Rico has a long history with the US. It's been part of the US for well over a century. And in fact, that over 300,000 US citizens in Puerto Rico would qualify for SSI, but for this residence restriction. Judge Sotomayor also highlighted that individuals who are eligible to receive SSI are entitled to the same SSI benefits, regardless of their personal contributions, regardless of their state's taxes and contributions to the United States Treasury, which is what funds the program. She also explained why the majority's reasoning was flawed. So by definition, SSI recipients pay few taxes, if any, yet they are low to no income. But in addition, citizens of the Northern Mariana Islands, again, a US territory, can get SSI. And then finally, she highlighted that there are plenty of states in the United States that do not pay so-called sufficient taxes, which was one of the reasons for the denial of Puerto Rican residents. So states like Vermont, Wyoming, the Dakotas, Montana, and Alaska do not pay sufficient taxes under the majority's sort of measuring test, but their residents still get SSI regardless. So for these reasons, Sotomayor argued the majority's tax-based arguments do not meet the rational basis test. And she concluded that there's no rational basis to deny this safety net program to US citizens residing in Puerto Rico. She emphasized this is a program, and I believe this is how a lot of us feel on this podcast today. This is a program of last resort aimed at preventing the most severe poverty. And the Constitution permits Congress to make all needful rules and regulations respecting the US territories. So thank you all for your time, and I look forward to our panelists diving deeper into the effects of this ruling.
Thank you, Danielle. Yeah, to go ahead and just jump right in, Isabel, what are the immediate effects on Puerto Ricans who are American citizens who wanted to receive these benefits? What are you kind of seeing?
Well, as Danielle very well described, we're talking about a very large population. As per studies conducted way back in 2011, that population was estimated around 300,000 to 350,000 people. And that represents about $1.2 to $1.4 billion a year. So we're talking about a very, very precarious situation for a lot of individuals and their families. We are improvising day by day, and in the course of my acquaintance with the people who would be eligible for this program, I can tell you it's what I'm starting to call a daily emergency, because you're not necessarily running to the hospital every day, but you're about to run to the hospital every day if there's a pill that is missing, if there's equipment that is missing, something you can't buy. And people are from day to day and improvising what they can or cannot do. This is something that was exacerbated very clearly during the hurricane, the aftermath after hurricanes in 2017, where people really had to choose, am I gonna buy the pill? Am I gonna buy am I gonna pay the electricity bill? Am I gonna, it was really, we're on survival mode. It became much more evident, but the truth is that I'm gonna call it a daily hurricane, because that didn't change for the people who are not receiving this assistance.
Right, right. And Puerto Rico, as Danielle mentioned, they pay more in taxes than some other states, but yet they are unable to access some of these benefits. Is there any current pending litigation or cases that might help or maybe continue to further exacerbate the situation?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I happened to file a lawsuit in August 2020, and it was stayed pending the Vaella Madero petition to the United States Supreme Court. Just yesterday, the stay was lifted. And in the meantime, we had filed an amended complaint and a second amended complaint, for which we are awaiting the court's decision on whether the amendments are going to go forward. Hopefully this way we are representing the class, which is an important distinction from Vaella Madero as an individual and in a defendant's position. So here we are actually pursuing the claim to access SSI.
That's great. That's great. Hopefully with the incoming newly appointed Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, we might have some influence over some of these things, particularly, you know, Puerto Rico makes our country diverse, and it's really hard for us to see that they wouldn't be treated the same as citizens, considering they are American citizens.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, well, it's very important to emphasize that Puerto Rico is part of the United States. It is within US borders. We are US citizens, and the whole system is part of the healthcare, national healthcare system. This is important not to isolate us as a population, because it does have an impact on the entire population, whether they are SSI patients or not.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good segue to kind of maybe even ask Jorge what he thinks or discuss some of the challenges hospitals are facing, not only related to this, the SSI issues, but with, you know, the Puerto Rican healthcare system in general, especially since 2017 when Hurricane Maria devastated the island's infrastructure. So Jorge, would you like to share a little bit about some of the challenges hospital systems are facing?
Yes, of course. In Puerto Rico, we have medical schools that graduates probably 150 doctors every year. About 20% decide to stay in the island residency programs. After residency, most of them leave to the mainland to do their specialty rotation or work. The cost of being a teaching hospital is high, so not many residency programs are available. You know, not having the right of receiving social supplemental income for the disabled citizens living in Puerto Rico becomes a burden to the healthcare providers, because the patients' unattended living conditions deteriorates their health. Healthcare providers humanly treat these patients sometimes when it's too late to improve quality of life to this population. Nearly 2/3 of the island residents are covered by Medicaid or Medicare. Both of those programs cap payments to the territory of Puerto Rico that at levels far below that the 50 states, Washington, D.C., and U.S. Virgin Islands received.
Wow.
This shortage of funds is especially covered by Congress assignments and local Puerto Rico government funds, funds that otherwise are to be utilized to improve healthcare facilities, education, infrastructure, and as a result, suitable place to investors to come and create employment. Year after year, uncertainty around reimbursement rates of Medicaid funds has lasting consequences. For example, having an appropriate fund will contribute to support residency programs, physician reimbursements, healthcare facilities, better medical equipment, and subsequently better care to our patients. Unfortunately, what Puerto Rico Medicaid state plan and Medicare Advantage programs has been doing is taking these Medicare cuts and passing them along to providers and the patients. This issue is especially affecting healthcare, where it's estimated that at least one doctor leaves Puerto Rico to work in the US mainland every day.
Wow.
This
That's
mass,
a lot.
yeah, it's terrible. This mass exodus of doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals is creating vacancies that are hard to fill, resulting in decreased access to care for most vulnerable, and I will say for everybody, not SSI only. For example, to see an adult rheumatologist right now, today, the waiting period, it can be 4 to 5 months. And then replace those physicians takes decades. Many of these doctors are 60 years old, 70 years old. So what we will do in 10 years, I don't know. Maybe, maybe move to the mainland. The consequence of the Medicare and Medicaid funds cap payments, as mentioned earlier, have been partially covered by Congress dollars assignments. These assignments are not a guarantee of dollars for next fiscal year. So when you try to retain doctors or bringing them back home from after completing their residency programs in the mainland, it's impossible to compete with their MD compensation schedules. Same for nurses and all other healthcare professionals. To make matters worse, when purchasing medical equipment, it is hard to demonstrate financial feasibility to the bank. This results on charging highest interest or denying loans because of the uncertainty of the incoming monies to repay the debt. As simple as that. Our healthcare industry is not cheaper than in other 50 states. We comply with all US healthcare laws and regulations, including Medicare, Joint Commission, NCQA, URAC, etc. Even for Americans who have lived their entire life in the mainland, moving to Puerto Rico, a US territory, will limit their benefits. That's basically so it's not only SSI population, it's the whole system is getting affected negatively.
Right. And that, I mean, the loss of talent alone is going to be incredibly tough, especially as the population gets older and without doctors and without the resources to do that, especially because, you know, the people are there who need the coverage and the care, and they're not staying, the providers aren't staying. I'm curious of the perspective of the Hospital Association. Mr. Pla, if you have any thoughts you'd like to share on what Jorge just shared about.
Thank you very much. I think that Jorge has put a very good picture of what we're seeing. So let me make just some comments regarding some of the issues that we feel we've been working with through the years, because at the end of the day, what we're talking is what benefits should Puerto Rico residents have, and whether those benefits are the same in the States as they are in Puerto Rico, and what are the consequences of not having the same benefits. And in the case of health, which I think is a basic concern, there are many examples of benefits that are not the same in the States as they are in Puerto Rico. So you can start doing a history test, and we've been able to, little by little, inch by inch, getting into a situation where we have made possible that benefits be the same. I can give you an example in the CHIP program. The CHIP program now, Puerto Rico gets the same amount that would get any other state under the circumstances of how the federal government allots those monies. In the case of Medicare, it took us 25 years to go from a 25% reimbursement to 100% reimbursement which we got finally in 2015. But this is where it gets interesting, because the formula by which you get to 100% reimbursement rate for Medicare patient is filled in the gaps with different things, like, for example, the SSI. So you multiply a rate by the SSI, and that gives you a number, and then you multiply that by a factor, and then you multiply that by the wage index, and you get a number. So what happens? Our SSI is 0. So when you multiply something by 0, the answer is 0. So we're not getting anywhere with that. The same thing happens somehow with the wage index, which is something that at the end of the day we need to work to, because the wage index in Puerto Rico is under the 25 percentile of the rest of the wage index in the States. So our numbers don't show up anywhere. So those are some of the things that we think we need to work with to be able to get the Medicaid and the Medicare program to be 100% reimbursed by Congress and by the federal government. In the case of Medicaid and the SSI, I think that you will recall that the Better Build Back had a specific language for the SSI, full reimbursement to Puerto Rico, and full reimbursement for the Medicaid program. But as you know, that legislation by President Biden is somewhere in a cooling period, if you would say that. And we have talked with the people that have been involved in this, including Senator Manchin, and he doesn't object to the Puerto Rico SSI, which is something very interesting, or nor to the Medicaid program, except for the fact that he doesn't agree with the rest of our program cannot go forward. So it's a long road in our case. How does that affect us? Well, it affects us, the hospitals in the rate issues. It affects the patients that sometimes they don't have the money to pay the deductibles, because if you are a Medicaid eligible patient or a Medicare eligible patient, there are co-insurance and deductibles that you need to pay. And the SSI payment to beneficiaries directly will surely take care of some of those issues in a very important way. So I think that the work that we need to do has to do with making sure that all of the benefits that the rest of the U.S. citizens in the mainland have are equal to the ones that the Puerto Rico residents should have.
Yeah, I agree completely on that point. I mean, we just celebrated Memorial Day yesterday. I served in the Air Force, and I served with some very proud American citizen Puerto Ricans, and I think it's important that I'm glad that we're able to share some of this information. I understand that Puerto Rico, and this question is kind of open to anybody, that a majority of Puerto Rico are part of the Medicare managed care. Is there a reason that they tend to be in managed care plans as opposed to traditional Medicare? Or?
You have to realize that the poverty level in Puerto Rico is somewhere around 48%. Maybe it's higher. It all depends on who calls the shots, but it's very high. So when the Medicare Advantage programs come into Puerto Rico, they are telling the people, we are going to offer you more benefits than the ones you have, and you're not going to pay for it. And that's a lollipop, which in reality, many of the people are changing to the Medicare Advantage programs, and we are probably about 80% now covered by Medicare Advantage programs, but they do not realize that in some cases, the managed care program per se tends to reduce the accessibility to services, which in the case of the traditional Medicare insurance program, there are not those limits. So that's something that we need to really work at, because I think that is hampering some of the services that are given to our patients.
Jorge, is that kind of what your experience is with the managed care, or you see much of that?
The Medicare Advantage in Puerto Rico runs about 80%, leaving 20% to the traditional Medicare. And basically what the population wants is the lollipop that Jaime just said. It's a lot of benefits, more benefit than the regular Medicare. But bottom line, how all these formulas and calculation formulas represent to the remaining sector of the industry is what really is getting hurt to Puerto Rico as a whole. Not only SSIs, not only MA Advantage, it's the whole population is getting affected because the payment system it's short in one side. So so and the other thing is that, and maybe Isabel can help on that, the truth is that Puerto Rico paid, all of us paid for Social Security on our wages, same amount than in all the states. And we also pay federal tax in many items, more than that's what I heard from Isabel, more than 6 or 7 states.
Yes, the Vaella Madero decision in the First Circuit has a dedicated section, which Danielle may have already thoroughly studied. It was very, very detailed account of all the taxes that, whether as individuals or as a unit, if you want to call it, Puerto Rico adds to the general fund, general treasury. And it's actually more than 6 states and the Mariana Islands. So that's only to approach the burdens and benefits analysis that has been going around. And it was surprising to see that the decision went that way, disregarding what was so well detailed in the First Circuit regarding the actual contributions from this side of the equation, right? Yeah, so.
I was curious, Isabel, I don't know if you know the answer to this question or not, but do immigrants, like maybe immigrants who don't have visas in America, are they able to access SSI?
Great question. There's actually a few categories of non-citizens, refugees and asylum persons, asylees, from a number of countries that do receive SSI in the mainland or the Northern Marianas. But we've tried to look for the legislative history where if at any point Congress conducted some kind of benefits and burdens analysis, specifically as to federal tax payments. And we haven't found anything so far, but we believe it's not part of the law. Having a tax history is not part of the requirements for application to this benefit, because we're talking about, like you said, very low income to no income population. So
right.
yeah.
So the SSI population that it targets is like the disabled and the elderly, people who may not actually.
Yeah. So what we're seeing, I mean, we just received an opposition to our motion for leave to amend from the Department of Justice, and they said that they were arguing that that we as plaintiffs are not arguing that SSI eligibility contributes to the basic livelihood of the nation in order to warrant applying citizenship constitutional protections. So we find a much higher bar for an equally disabled population, which we understand is either discriminatory or just irrational or both.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of seems that way, because on the one hand, you have Justice Kavanaugh saying that well, the residents of Puerto Rico don't pay every tax, so they shouldn't be entitled to every federal benefits, but they do pay as much in tax, and they are American citizens, and yet there are immigrants who come to the country, and not to belittle the immigrants who come or belie their situation, but it just seems unfair because there's a lot of rhetoric on immigration, and Puerto Rico are their citizens of the United States.
Well, what we find particularly cruel, and I'm using the word cruel because Justice Sotomayor used it, and so we freely use it as well, is if a disabled population who is accessing, disabled, blind, and aged, according to the requirements of the SSI, if anybody else, everybody else who receives SSI is not humiliated with a loss of constitutional rights for applying to SSI, and somehow this bar on Puerto Rico residents is higher. Now, if you apply to SSI, then you must lose. You can't be both. You can't be SSI and have constitutional rights somehow, so you have neither. In the end, you don't have constitutional rights or SSI.
Right.
Well, Dominic, I would like to add a number here.
Sure, please.
For example, Medicare Advantage plans received in Puerto Rico, $616. This is 2021 information. $616 per person. In the States, Medicare Advantage pay $1,036 per person. So that means that we need to do the exactly Joint Commission, all the requirements, everything, all 9 yards, with $600 than $1,036 in the States. So that's really something that it gets worse every year.
That's really interesting, and actually, this might be a good point to introduce our newest panelists here. Luis, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself really quickly, and then you can jump in? I have a question for you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dominic. My name is attorney Luigi Pizarro. I'm president and CEO of FIDE LLC. It's a consulting company within healthcare law, healthcare compliance, healthcare policy. And glad to join this distinguished panelist. I see Attorney Isabel Avislaiman. Saludos, Isabel. And then Mr. Jaime Pla, Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Hospital Association. Saludos, Jaime.
Hola, saludos. Quiero aprovechar el momento. Le doy las gracias a todos ustedes por haberme invitado a la actividad. Ahora tienen aquí un magnífico representante en Luis, así que yo me voy a retirar y le doy las gracias nuevamente por la oportunidad que he tenido de dialogar con ustedes sobre este asunto tan importante.
Gracias, Jaime.
Gracias.
Yes, thank you, Jaime. Appreciate it.
Gracias.
So Luigi, we were just talking about the managed care kind of aspect. And I was curious, if you wanted to share a little bit about your thoughts on like the effects of, not only the loss of the federal benefits, from the wage index perspective, but, the disparities in reimbursed healthcare generally in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I mean, I don't know if this fact has been shared, but whenever we're talking about the healthcare disparity in healthcare between Puerto Rico and the rest of the United States of America, I always talk about the per capita cost, healthcare cost per year. And the average healthcare per capita cost in the United States of America, it's $12,000 approximately. Don't have the exact figure, but I know it's surrounding 12,000. And when you compare that with Puerto Rico, which is about 3,500 to 4,000, that's when you see, very blatantly the disparity. It's as I think Mr. Pesquera was just saying, same compliance standards, same quality standards, same US board certified doctors and healthcare professionals, that many of them go to the mainland, given their bilingual and professional training. Yet a third of the healthcare resources, and that's, you know, the reality of Puerto Rico as of today. You know, it's a same Medicare program, same Medicaid program, yet we have to do more with less. And it's not a problem. I think Puerto Rico takes pride in doing more with less, but it comes to a point where you need a bare minimum to be able to operate at a quality standard. And we're way past beyond that a threshold. So, you know, and as Jorge was saying, Medicare Advantage, we've been able throughout the years, we've been lobbying in Congress. This is the one topic that, you know, healthcare can be very controversial among stakeholders. This is the one topic where every single stakeholder in Puerto Rico is on the same page. I'm talking about doctors, hospital, community pharmacies, brand pharmacies, 330, the MCOs, the managed care plans, the PBMs, the government, private sector, everyone, because, you know, it's hard to operate a system or even have predictability over the model that we're using. In Medicaid, for example, right now we are almost on a year-to-year basis right now. We have to avoid the Medicaid cliff. What is the Medicaid cliff? It's Puerto Rico by statute. It has a ceiling, has a cap.
A cap.
And that cap, it's completely outdated, and it was temporarily with the PPACA, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, the so-called Obamacare, as some call it, the ACA. When it was enacted in 2010, it provided temporary funding for the Medicaid program, 5.8 billion to Puerto Rico from 2010 to 2019, but that funding expired in 27, you know, we consumed that funding by 2017. So I always tell people that the best thing from the healthcare funding perspective that happened to Puerto Rico was Hurricanes Irma and Maria, because if it weren't for that, Puerto Rico would have not gotten a full federal matching and full federal funding for the Medicaid program for 2 years in 2017. So it saved the Medicaid cliff that we first experienced when the ACA funding ran out. So, and then after those 2-year allocation, due to the hurricanes, we've been, you know, on a year-to-year basis, going back to Congress to advocate for what we call a healthcare parity or healthcare equity, or by now we call it just a road towards equity, because we know, you know, given the whole reality of funding in Congress, that full parity at this moment, it's hard to acquire. So we're trying to establish what we call a road towards equity. And for example, right now, there are about 7 mandatory essential benefits that every single state offers as part of its Medicaid program that Puerto Rico cannot offer given the inequity and the lack of federal funding. Essential mandatory benefits. Those are prenatal care for aliens. That is non-emergency medical transportation. That is adult vaccination. The 13 recommended CDC vaccines that every state offers Puerto Rico cannot offer to its adult population. Medicare, obviously above 65 does cover it, but that quartile of the population between 18 years and 64 does not have in the Medicaid segment an offering for adult vaccination. Diabetes medical equipment is another essential mandatory benefit. And another big example is the Part B premium for the dual population. What that's called the MSP, the Medicare Savings Program, wherein all the states, the dual eligible population, those patients that are eligible to Medicaid given their indigence, and to Medicare given their age or disability eligibility. So those are eligible to both programs, Medicare and Medicaid, are called duals. So that dual population in every single state, including the rest of the territories, the state covers with Medicaid funding the Part B premium. Medicare Part B has a premium every month. Right now in 2022, the Part B premium is $170 a month. That's the cost. So right now, given that program, the MSP program, every state Medicaid program covers the Medicare Part B premium, the $170 a month for that patient. Puerto Rico has 280,000 duals. They're called Platinos in Puerto Rico. So those 280 duals have to cover the Part B premium themselves from their Social Security check. If Puerto Rico had equity in that program, the Medicaid state program would have funding to cover the $170 a month to those 180,000 duals, which means that that population, all those viejitos, all those elders, would have $170 of more disposable income in their pockets to be able to buy medication, to buy groceries, to pay for their utilities. So this goes beyond healthcare towards economic relief, economic development, because obviously they're going to spend that money in the community pharmacies, or in the economy of the island. So I just wanted to pinpoint that clear-cut example of just giving you a concrete benefits that are lacking. Not to mention, because when you're talking about healthcare from the managed care perspective, from the health plan, a health insurance perspective, the patient, you have benefits and you can access a network of providers. So from the benefit perspective, I just gave you an example of benefits that are currently mandatory essential benefits that are currently not offered in Puerto Rico due to the lack of funding. We've been able to address a lot of the compliance issues because many of the compliance issues that Puerto Rico's Medicaid program had was, again, lack of funding to be able to establish program integrity measures that would help battle fraud, waste, and abuse. So now Congress has been positively responding in the last few years in requiring program integrity measures, but hand in hand providing the financial resources to be able to implement those program integrity measures. So we've been able to start that process. The benefit component is one, and then the other, the part about the healthcare provider network, it has to do with provider compensation. That's why many of the on the benefit side, that's why many of the patients leave, because automatically as US citizens, they can move to Texas, to Florida, or any other part of the US, and automatically they'll be eligible to SSI, to the Medicaid program, to Medicare. So the federal government can save money by addressing healthcare issues in Puerto Rico, as opposed to continue having more beneficiaries moving to the mainland, where healthcare cost is going to be way much more expensive to the federal government and to the state wherever they're moving to. On the provider compensation side, it is the same thing. Automatically it's a death spiral in terms of the compensation. They when we try to advocate or lobby for the federal government or the either Congress or HHS, they say, well, that's the healthcare cost in Puerto Rico. Yeah, it is the healthcare cost that the formula provides you, because we've been continuously underpaid. So the wage component of the salaries to the nurses, to the doctors, to the healthcare professionals in general has been very low. So we need to break that debt spiral and be able, because Puerto Rico's economy, it's not an international economy, it's within the US economy. So automatically, if you're a nurse and you are, you're supposed to earn $12,000, to keep the example simple, as opposed to $4,000, you say, well, automatically I'll just move to Florida or to Texas, and I'm going to move into equity or to parity or to better salaries. Of course, you're going to find better salaries in the mainland because there are more healthcare resources within the economy. So that's the issue on the compensation side, because it's the same model as in the rest of the US. It's just the underfunding of the system. It's what creates economies of scale and what's creating the whole access issues to the healthcare professionals in terms of compensation and to the beneficiaries. In terms of the hospitals per se, it also impacts the healthcare infrastructure. To rebuild the healthcare infrastructure, we have, and I proudly say it, we have one of the best doctors in the nation. Puerto Rico produces fully bilingual US board certified doctors. My brother, for example, he's neurologist in Tampa General Hospital, head of the neurology department. But when you look at the hospital here, you sort of, it doesn't look like the hospitals in Florida. And that's, again, goes back to the element of resources, healthcare infrastructure. Same doctor in Tampa or in Puerto Rico, but less resources. Not to mention that the cost of medication is exactly the same thing in Florida than in Puerto Rico. The office, real estate, it's pretty much the same. Utilities, it's pretty much the same. The only thing that when you look at the cost of living index, utilities, real estate, groceries, the only thing that is cheap in Puerto Rico, it's healthcare. And that's because we need to break that death spiral of the wages and the resources. We need to spend more in the healthcare economy of Puerto Rico to be able to provide quality care services at the level of the rest of the nation.
Good.
Wow, yeah, that's really well said.
Amazing.
That. We're near time, but I did want to just ask you really quickly, Luigi. I understand that Puerto Rico doesn't have like congressmen or senators. What are some of the ways that people can help, or what are the groups that are helping advocate for this cause? Because I feel like sharing this information is going to be really useful. But what are other ways that people can help that are interested, especially people in the mainland?
Well, I think there are more. One thing that we always forget here, even here in Puerto Rico amongst ourselves, is there's more Puerto Ricans in the mainland than in Puerto Rico itself. We do have in particularly the areas where we have high Puerto Rican population, we do have Congress women and congressmen and senators that are allies of Puerto Rico, and that is a good way to use the Puerto Rican diaspora in the mainland to advocate for this effort. Also, a resident, we do have a resident commissioner in the House. Her name is Congresswoman Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, and she's been championing the healthcare flag since the inception of her tenure in Congress. Same with Governor Pedro Pierluisi and the previous representatives, Governor Garcia Padilla. I think that is again one thing where all the leaders of the island at the state level have been able to establish relationships in Congress. But to go straight to your question, I mean, I would use the Congress women and men in high penetration areas of Puerto Rican population and work with them. You know, we've been able. There's always something good amongst the bad, and one of a good thing that happened to healthcare was Hurricanes Irma and Maria, because it put Puerto Rico's healthcare at the forefront with both Republicans and Democrats. The IQ level of Congress about Puerto Rico's healthcare was very, very, very low at that time. And right now, I tell you, you walk into one of the main committees with jurisdiction over healthcare. In the House is the Ways and Means Committee, or the Energy and Commerce for Medicaid. And in the Senate is the Senate Finance Committee. If you walk in to talk to either majority or minority staff, they will very well know what is Puerto Rico's healthcare challenges. And the issue right now, it's more of an economic issue, you know, amongst the whole budgetary issues that the U.S. Congress and the federal government has. But then again, if there's a will, there's a way. We need that push, that will to prioritize and be able to fix. And maybe it cannot be done, you know, at once, but continue that road towards equity that we've been able to trace in order to address and close the gap. Because, you know, Jorge mentioned it, you know, right now, Medicare Advantage, Puerto Rico is 42% below the national average, and it has increased from where we were. But when you look at the rest of the mainland, it has increased even more. So even though we've received a bump, the gap it's much larger between Puerto Rico and the rest of the mainland. We're even 42 below the national average. We're 25%, 30% below the lowest state, and even 25% below the U.S. Virgin Islands.
And we know that Puerto Rico can respond well to not only the hurricane, but to COVID-19, to the pandemic. They were one of the most vaccinated. Once they got the resources in place, they were able to be one of the most vaccinated territories among the United States.
That's a good point, Dominic. In fact, that's a good testament of when given equal opportunity, Puerto Rico can deliver and can strive in a successful manner, becoming, we were the first jurisdiction to have the highest vaccination rate in the nation. And that was a perfect example of when we were treated equally under the CARES Act funding. Puerto Rico actually, and that was in partnership with the private sector, because that was the private sector and the third sector, all the different non-for-profit entity, along with the MCOs, along with the doctors and the hospitals. The government, in partnership with the private sector, established a good strategy to vaccinate the population. So definitely, when given the opportunity, we can deliver. And I'm sure that whenever Puerto Rico has equal funding for Medicare and Medicaid, we will be able to address clinical gaps of care that we currently have. Right now, Puerto Rico, it's like top 3 in many chronic conditions: diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and that in part is due to the lack of equity in funding. So that's not something, that is correlated. That's all related.
Right. Well, as we near time, I would like to go ahead and just open it up if anybody has any last remarks they would like to make before we go. Danielle, would you like to share?
Yes, Dominic, I have a question for Isabel. So
Yes.
Isabel, as NALHE and your brothers and sisters in NALHE, is there anything that we can do and that the listeners and viewers of this podcast can do to assist you as you pursue this potential class action, maybe down the line, amicus briefs, things like that? What
That's
can we do to
exactly
help you?
That's exactly right. I think this has been a very enlightening conversation that we've been having, as there's a lot of data. Luis has provided so much data that I'm just taking notes, because there's a lot of opportunity to express discontent in a more public way, rather than, I don't know how it's been handled so far, but there's a lot of potential to discuss this in a more effective way that I think it would be great we can discuss some amicus briefs. There's definitely various perspectives from the healthcare industry to more private sector. There's probably many ways to look at this. To find, not dismiss. I think there's an issue of perception. I don't want to say it this way, but these are not just poor people that you can brush to the side and disregard because they're just poor people asking for help. I'm saying that as a terrible way of looking at plaintiffs, right? My clients. We see that this goes across the board. It has an impact on the entire healthcare system. And in the end, that a hospital cannot provide the best possible care, the best possible equipment, has an impact on everyone, not just SSI recipients. Or potentially SSI recipients. So it's the problem is a lot bigger than it looks like, and that has to trickle across the entire national healthcare system. And we are U.S. citizens, so this has to somehow be interconnected at a national scale. It's not an isolated situation of the poor people in Puerto Rico. So I would like to explore that further. Yes.
Thank you.
Or any parting words?
Oh, I'm very happy for this conversation. Thank you very much, Dominic, for the opportunity of opening that door and getting your help and support. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. The island, as I mentioned before, it adds diversity to this country, and it should not be left behind, particularly when they are tax-paying, military-serving American citizens. Mm-hmm. So I want to thank Isabel, Luigi, Danielle, and Jorge for their amazing advocacy, for all the work that they do, on the front lines, behind the scenes. We are super grateful. We appreciate your time, and maybe we can regroup for another session about Puerto Rico, because I think it's a very interesting topic. I think there's so many more things we can cover.
Hopefully I will have updates for you, positive outcomes soon, at least a fork in the road where we can continue walking in a certain direction.
Well, we're looking forward to it. We're looking forward to it. I'll be looking forward to hearing from you, Isabel
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
and Jorge.
Same here, same here. We're right now in the Puerto Rico got a Medicaid funding through December 13. So it's going to be a busy summer before the midterm elections to see if we can address these issues by or before December 13.
That's great. That's great. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much. This will conclude the NALHE Talks policy on Puerto Rico. Thank you so much, everyone.
Good luck with all
Thank
of
you.
your efforts, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.